Before we begin with the questions and attempted answers, a couple of people have wondered why I'm holding up my phone if I'm like checking phone messages or something. The reason why I'm holding up my phone is because that's where my notes are on the seminar. So I'm not ignoring the people here to check messages. Okay, so we can have questions from people, hopefully some from folks elsewhere. And Naomi, when you, yes, thank you.
So one thing you're going to have to do is the mic's there.
Mike's where?
Right in front of you. So you're going to have to repeat the question again.
Can we, do we not have a second mic?
No.
Okay, I'll try to.
So you can, Whoops. Sorry, everyone, I was typing so fast, so a lot of typos with that. But here's the first question. So it's from Peter Elias.
Okay.
Here we, a sangha, either individually or collectively, hampered or diminish your own personal efforts towards growth and development? If so, will you please forgive us and grant us the opportunity to do better?
Well, let's break that up, and could you repeat the first part?
Okay.
We don't have a mic that can go to Naomi?
Not today.
Okay.
I haven't figured it out.
Maybe I should come and snap.
If you sit here, if we go your chair here.
All right, I could even go on the ground there.
Well, no, there's a chair right there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. There's no one behind me that I'm going to be blocking.
No. Because my hearing is not good. I mean, that was the other day when I had trouble understanding the questions. Part of it is I don't, you know,
Okay. So,
just the first part.
yeah. Strange being so close to you. Let me just, I think he repeated it. Okay. Now, had we as a sangha, either individually or collectively, hampered or diminished your own personal efforts towards growth and development?
Who is your here in the question? That's what I don't understand.
All right, so
Is he asking, if Peter, if you're listening, are you asking, have the Sangha hampered my efforts, or have we as a Sangha hampered our own efforts as individuals? I need to know which question it is. Okay, let's go on.
okay, now that's all I have so far. Wait, let me just see if there's any questions on. Yeah, here's one. Yeshe, when you were with Karmapa, and sorry, I'm going slowly because I'm hoping they can hear me.
Okay, good.
I'm going to start this again. Yeshe, when you were with Karmapa, did he offer any advice about how to transform apathy in other people? I asked regarding my environmental work in Florida, how to change hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm. He did speak about this in a general way. Now, this was several years ago. This was, I think, in either 2015 or maybe even before then. But he wasn't so much talking about how we as individuals can convert others to environmental activism. But he did say that the environmental issue, climate change, is no longer merely a scientific issue. It is a moral and ethical issue, and therefore ethical leaders such as prominent religious and other spiritual figures have a duty to speak about it to their respective congregations. That's what he said.
Okay. And Peter Lai said, personal effort. Yes, your own Yeshe.
Mine.
Yeah.
Have the Sangha in any way impeded mine? No. I probably impede others. I've never been impeded by anybody else. No one else has ever said, done, or probably even thought anything that could impede my spiritual progress. My problems are me. You know, I've got one massive set of problems and they're all in here.
And what was the second part?
Well, it was if so, then,
Oh, yeah.
so there's no,
that's,
here.
no, that's it for now.
I have a question.
Sure. Who wants to go? You go, Sally?
Actually, I have two questions. The first
Could you
one-
temporarily remove your mask so I can understand? Because
Do you want me to stand?
no, you don't need to stand. I said, so I can understand.
Oh, there you go. I heard stand. Okay. All right, so here it is. And this is something other people may notice. During pujas, my kleshas get worse. And I'm noticing it actually getting worse pretty much from puja to puja.
When
I come to klesha, when I come to
you're talking about group pujas.
Group pujas.
Yeah.
And when they're long, like a week, 10 days long, I notice they're just getting worse. Whatever kleshas I have, and I have so many. And I'm just noticing, and I heard one of the teachers say, or I read it recently, that it means that the fire of Vajrayana is just getting more powerful, which means it's not necessarily a bad thing. I just had that as a question of, does that make sense? And then I had another question.
Well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't know if it necessarily means that the fire of Vajrayana is burning all the brighter. It could. I think we have to be cautious in assuming that our klesha eruptions are signs of. They're certainly signs of going through a process. Now, when you say getting worse, do you mean like, let's say, during the week, they will get progressively worse?
Yes.
Or do you mean that each time you attend a week-long puja, they're worse than they were the previous week-long puja?
Both.
Both.
And my klesha, is sugar, and it makes me crazy. And I
What do you mean your
literally
klesha is
say,
sugar?
Sugar, candy.
You mean having?
Candy. In fact, not only that, but I have family members who say, I'm gonna give you some chocolate, but you've only 10 minutes before you leave, so eat it and then leave.
So in other words, you're saying that when you have sugar, your kleshas, okay.
Yeah, like alcohol. That's my alcohol addiction. It's an addiction. There you go. So that's one of my.
Well, that doesn't necessarily
worse.
mean it's an addiction. I mean, speaking as somebody who's addicted to everything I've ever liked. I mean, basically, if I like something, I'm addicted to it. If I open a book and I like the first page, I'm addicted to everything that person ever wrote. But usually when you indulge in addiction, you temporarily feel better, not worse. So,
yeah, until it wears off.
So in other words, if you have a piece of chocolate now, that won't cause immediate kleshas. It will cause kleshas when your blood sugar goes back down.
No, both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can vary.
Like drinking alcohol. I mean, you can do all kinds of kleshas when you're first drink alcohol, and then even worse when the alcohol wears off.
Yeah, I've definitely been that guy.
So I was just asking about the fire.
Well, first of all, I would say that it does sound like you could learn to, or you could, and you probably already are, be careful with your blood sugar. When kleshas surge from physical causes, whether it's too much caffeine, too little caffeine, when you're used to too much caffeine, too much sugar, too little sugar when you're used to a certain amount of sugar, eating too much protein, not eating enough protein, I mean, it can be anything. We're so fragile. Then I think that's a distinct type of event from when our kleshas surge because of the irritation of group puja. But I'm assuming from the way you phrased your question initially that it's not just sugar, it's also the irritation of being in the group, having to deal with the group energy.
Well, for so many hours.
Yeah, for so many
how do I
hours.
keep my energy up? I eat sugar. Hour after hour after hour.
And then that makes your kleshas. But do you think is the sugar causing the kleshas, or is irritation with the group?
I don't think it's irritation, but I do think it's just being tired.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
Go take a nap, and I can't, so I eat more sugar just to get through it. But then that brings on like you know.
See, I use tea, and during these all day long pujas, that's the only time I can actually drink tea all day long and still sleep at night. And if I drink less tea, or if the tea's not, let's say, made by the person who makes the tea best, and it's less strong, or it doesn't have enough milk, I'm a picky tea drinker. You know, I'm a coffee slut. I'll drink any kind of coffee as long as it's not decaf, which I think should be illegal. But you know, I'm very picky about tea, and at the same time I want lots of tea. I mean, you know, and you've sat beside me often enough in pujas to see how much tea I can actually drink. I mean, it's just, as often as Nicole comes around, that so often shall my cup be refilled. And I'm happy, enthusiastic. I'll chant out loud. I'll even go up with falsetto the way they like to do as they chant. And I asked Lama Yeshe about it. I said, what's still with this endless modulation? You know, you don't go all the way down. So then each phrase, you go higher and higher and higher and higher. He says, well, that means I'm getting excited. And I thought he was saying, no, it means you have a different understanding of music. But anyway, and then, you know, it gets to the point where I go as high as I can, and then finally I'm singing like Mickey Mouse, and my throat can only take it for a minute, and then I gotta do I do an octave, and then they go down, but not down far enough, and then it's like a dogfight, you know, it's like watching the you know, this one goes above, this one goes down. Anyway, I'm an aerial dogfight, not dogs fighting. I guess we don't use that term anymore, do we? Dogfight? For, you know. Anyway, so I'm fine as long as the caffeine doesn't stop. I'm not irritated. I love everybody. I love the puja. It's like, oh, I wish I could do this every day. And then if the next day there's not enough tea, or the tea's not made by who, you know, makes it strong, I get cranky. Ooh, I get cranky. And the way to know I'm cranky is I'm quiet in puja. If I don't make a lot of noise, if I'm quiet, I'm cranky. I'm cranky. And I do get cranky. So I understand. I go through what you go through, and it's in my own particular cranky, quiet way. And then I get cranky about everything. The modulation makes me cranky. If the sweet spot on the drum won't stay in one place because of changes in moisture, and I can't find it, and I don't like the sound my drumming is making, I get real cranky. And if the drumsticks aren't exactly of the same softness on the heads, I get cranky. And then, so it's like basically by the end, I'm just so cranked out that it's like, so I think that's part of the experience of puja. There are going to be times where the sugar wears off.
Yeah.
There are going to be times where you don't get tea at all, or where the tea only comes at bizarrely long intervals. And we get spoiled. I mean, I get really spoiled. I mean, you know, people are coming around filling my teacup every 5 minutes. That's pretty sweet. I don't get that at home. I live alone, and I won't do that for myself. So that's going to happen. And I think this is one of the things that in the Zen tradition, they have a saying about group practice. And of course, their group practice is not usually as noisy as ours, but they say that the benefit of group practice is the same as putting the potatoes in a bag and shaking the bag. The potatoes clean one another through friction. And so I guess that's part of the experience, part of the territory.
Yes. I had another question.
Sure.
When people do get cranky,
Yes.
people have a hard time, and I'm feeling it, they actually help me because they're helping me be more patient.
You mean when other people are cranky?
When other people are cranky, when I'm getting off, I feel like I'm on the receiving end of crankiness, and sometimes it gets to be a bit much like a long puja where you're tired
Mhm.
and you're on the receiving end of the crankiness, and it's just like, you walk out of the room with tears in your eyes saying, wow. It's actually a gift.
Oh,
Because
good.
it's teaching patience.
Well, that's good.
When that other person was questioning, Peter was questioning, saying, am I hurting anybody? Am I bothering anybody? I just wanted to put out there, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, that when I am on the receiving end of being bothered, it's actually helping me. It's actually getting me to be more patient, getting me to really do my practice, getting me to focus on what's the most important part of my practice. But I would like to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I think that indicates that you have set up the type of positive mindfulness mechanism that I described this morning, where you're prepared for other people's crankiness. And instead of igniting your own letting the flame of their cranky candle ignite the flame of your potentially cranky candle, you just respond to it with mindfulness and don't, react. It's interesting how we're very conditioned in our society, especially now, to always stand up for ourselves. And don't let anybody push you around. Don't be a doormat. And sometimes even in the wellness disciplines, as we understand and practice them nowadays, people will say, well, you have to take care of yourself and you have to, which is true. And you have to, don't be a doormat and stand up for yourself, and which are also true. But sometimes people will use that as an excuse for actually going a little bit overboard and being prickly and aggressive and preemptive, and people become preemptive in the fear that somebody is going to step on their toes or be cranky with them and drive them from the room in tears. And I think that it's a question of balance, but if you can actually respond to other people's aggression. I mean, crankiness is aggression, right? When it's inflicted on another person. If I'm just cranky within myself, I'm probably only hurting myself. But if I get cranky with somebody else, then that's aggression on my part. And if you can respond to other people's aggression with patience, and if it actually becomes a reminder to you of the need for patience, that's excellent. That's good discipline. And it brings up this point that I was approaching to and then forgot about. Now I reminded myself. Khenchen Trungpa Rinpoche used to say this, and he probably still does. And I found it immensely helpful. Not that I've by any means always been able to practice it, but at least I have the intention to do so. And he said that he was speaking about domestic situations, family dynamics, and things like that. But it's equally true when two people are working together. And he said basically, when one person gets angry at another or is cranky with another, that is not enough to cause a quarrel, to cause a fight. For that to lead to a quarrel, the other person has to also react with anger. So if you can not respond reactively, if you cannot automatically get angry when other people get angry at you, you can prevent many quarrels and fights, not all, but many quarrels and fights from beginning, because there's no friction. And what I've found is helpful, and again, I cannot claim that I always practice this or that I even practice it in most such situations. What I've been found helpful is when someone is angry at me, and this happens. People get angry at me, and there are many different reasons, but I think the fundamental common denominator of all those reasons is I can be quite a jerk. And when people get angry at me, whether their anger is justified by my behavior or not, there is always something I can learn. There's always at least a little bit of truth in what they're screaming at me, yelling at me, hissing at me. It varies. And I have a choice. I can choose to fixate on that person's motivation, which is what we often do. Well, I think you're really angry at me because of blah, 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 blah. So I don't need to listen to you. Or I can listen to what they say and I can try to find the lesson for me in there. Because in my experience, there is always something I can learn. And so when you have the skill that you're describing where you can respond to, even when you're tired and you're coming down off of sugar or off of tea, or God help you, off of both at once, and you're you're not at your best.
And it's the last day.
And it's the last day. See, by the last day, I'm kind of like approaching it like the final push. The last day is rough. We don't get much of a lunch break. And there were so many years that I couldn't make it for the final days of a lot of these pujas that for many years, I'd never been to the last day. I only got to go to the last day of Yamantaka like a few years ago. Up till then, I'd always been having to go somewhere or do something, And so I was not as familiar with the last day as most people. And I also didn't have the user-friendly versions of the pujas that I had helped somewhat facilitated, but Debbie did the heavy lifting. And so I was kind of in the dark. Now we have Debbie created these texts, I think it was Debbie, where you have the end of Yamantaka for the first 6 days and then a separate version that incorporates the seventh day. I mean, that's a lifesaver for me because there was never 1 year I did not screw up the order of texts and then I would get mad. Oh, I would get mad because my pride was hurt. I'm the guy who's supposed to be able to follow this stuff, just like a native reader. I mean, it's like, and I can't follow this? Well, if I can't follow it, you're going too damn fast. Well, not necessarily. I haven't been here most of the years. So anyway, so I understand that. That's when I get real cranky. On the last day, if I get lost, oh, it's not good. I'll actually drop the honorifics when I speak to Lama Drata, and that's it. I'll just get frank, and so I understand. So you're doing very well.
Okay. All right, and you go.
Accepting that you have a klesha is a hard pill to swallow.
Yep.
How do you do it?
Well, first of all, everybody has all kleshas. So there's nothing to accept. Everybody has all kleshas. We tend to specialize. It's kind of like you go through high school and up through, well, now we specialize in high school a bit, but basically everybody has to take science, everybody has to take language and a foreign language, hopefully, and and then when you get to university, you specialize. Well, we're all at the PhD level of kleshas, but up to high school, through high school, we were all on the same page. So at the root, our reptilian brains are all pretty much the same. It's when we get to things like our training in this life, our specific genetic inheritance, and so on, both nature and nurture, we can tend to specialize. So it's life or death, though. If you don't take responsibility for your own kleshas, you will project them. onto others. Actually, Naomi and I were talking about this at lunch, and she, quoting her mother, she reminded me of a principle that is extremely valuable. Sometimes we're not that honest with ourselves about, this is not what Naomi's mother said, it's an introduction. We're not that honest with ourselves about how bad our kleshas are. If you really want to know what your biggest problems are, look at the people around you and think about what pisses you off. Because it's with almost mathematical certainty. There are exceptions, but with almost mathematical certainty, I think we can say that what bothers us most in others is our biggest problem. So I hate arrogant people because I'm really frigging arrogant. I mean, if I look at my thoughts, about every second thought is, you're so damn smart, how smart you are. Oh, you're so pleasing to the lamas. They like you. Oh, you're so helpful. You know, that's all arrogance. That's all that shit is. That's straight, honest, undiluted, 90 proof arrogance, 100 proof arrogance. Okay. So I really have trouble with arrogance. I have trouble with laziness because I am as lazy as, I don't think there is actually an analogy, because sloths are not actually as lazy as, you know, and they have this sweet smile. You ever see a front facial look at us? The only animals that always look as though they're smiling, you know. So I'm lazy, I'm greedy, never enough. Doesn't matter what it is, food, sugar, you know, I mean, the only reason I don't have seconds of Phyllis's delicious desserts is because I can't at my age. I would have when I could, but if I was your age again, I'd be eating thirds, you know, and all that. These are the things that, there are others, but we'll stop there. And so these are the things that upset me in other people. And that's how I know that they're my biggest problems. So that's actually good news. You don't have to engage in neurotic introspection because you're projecting. So you can see it on the screen in front of you. Whatever bothers you in your coworkers, your life partners, your family, fellow sangha members, whatever bothers you is what you've got to deal with first. But notice I said first, because it's a question of what's your biggest problem, not what's your only problem. We all have all problems. I know people don't like to hear that, and many people won't admit it. It goes against a lot of contemporary or New Age wellness dogma, but we all have every problem. If you ever find yourself thinking, well, that's a problem I don't have, then it's probably a really bad one. Because the most effective defense mechanism that your problems can create is hiding, pretending not to exist.
Just got to wake up my screen. Okay, so from Karen. Oh, sorry. Thank you for this welcome teaching. Could you please speak about the intention and motivation in regarding to working on kleshas? Happiness, although you said we can't become happy by wanting to be.
The relationship between the intention to achieve lasting happiness and the desire to be happy is probably, I mean, that's the general principle that is taught in the Lojong teachings, and it's true that we can't become happy by desiring our own happiness, by trying to become happy. But we can take steps that we know are conducive to happiness. And I'll use I'll stretch a very traditional saying into an analogy. There's the saying, you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstraps because you're the one doing the lifting, so you can't lift yourself that way. But you can, if necessary, lift your foot by the shoelaces or bootstraps onto the first rung of a ladder. And then you're going to have to actually swing the second foot up the rung. So in a sense, you can't lift yourself straight into happiness, but you can take a step that will begin the process of becoming happy. As far as the motivation for dealing with kleshas goes, you can have either of two motivations. One motivation is simply, this isn't worth it. I don't want to live this way anymore. And we could call that a selfish motivation, but it is not, it is benign selfishness, not malignant selfishness. Malign or malignant selfishness is when you care only about yourself and not about others. If you care primarily about yourself, but in a way that is not harmful to others, that is selfish, but it's not a problem. It's a step in the right direction. The other motivation, of course, is this klesha causes me to be a nuisance to others. I don't want to be a nuisance to others. I want to help others. So therefore, I want to work on it. And that's an unselfish motivation. Realistically speaking, however, the two motivations tend to go together and be mixed. Sometimes we'll be more concerned about the effects our behavior have on others, and sometimes we'll be more concerned about the pain they cause ourselves. I think the easiest klesha to use as an example for this is anger. And it's easiest both because it's less deceptive. It is deceptive, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But it is less deceptive than some of the others. Like pride and desire are very, they're harder to I think, to recognize sometimes. We start from, if we assume we're starting from, let's say, anger is ground zero, we start from a place where we believe that allowing ourselves to get angry will make us feel better. Almost as though we have gas and burping will make us feel better. We think of anger that way. And even those who mean well and write books about such things will sometimes tell us, let yourself get angry. Let yourself express your anger. This is healthy, this is necessary. Now, there are specific contexts in which that is true, trauma recovery and so on. But in general, it's not a good idea to let yourself express your anger or talk to others when you're angry. I've tried it both ways. I've tried to reason with others when I'm angry. Well, I'm not even reasonable when I'm angry. So reasoning with others is a joke. It's like talking to people when you're drunk. Just don't do it. So actually, I would say that speaking when angry is like drunk dialing, basically. And I've done both. So, hey, I know what I'm talking about. But the fundamental illusion of anger, aside from the notion that it's our friend, that it makes us stronger, which of course it doesn't, it makes us weaker, is that it will make us feel better. If you actually, the next time you feel angry. And I don't just mean that you're thinking about something that you object to. You know, like when I think about the murder of 21 people in Uvalde, I don't feel anger. I feel horror. I feel a sense of urgency. For me, I mean, if it were one of my children, of course, I would also be angry. But beyond anger, what I feel is fear for the future. You know, what are we becoming? You know, because this is us. This is our country. What are we doing? How did we get this far, and how can we stop it from going further? That's different from anger, I think. Anger, the anger that I'm talking about is resentment. You know, anger starts out oftentimes as feeling that something is unfair. You know, so-and-so is being unfair. I came here to do such and such volunteer work and they won't let me do that. They're making me do such and such other volunteer work that I didn't sign up for, and it's not fair. So I think a lot of times our anger starts as resentment, which starts as feeling that something's not fair. And you know, I've spent much of my, not so much in retreat, but in between retreats and so on, working at the where I was living at the monastery in Poughkeepsie. You know, I would find myself becoming quite resentful of things. And so I'm not talking about a feeling that I don't have. You know. The thing about anger is, and you have to experience this for yourself, because my telling you won't, belief is not enough here. You have to experience it. It is impossible, completely impossible, to be angry and happy at the same moment. No one has ever been, no one is right now, and no one ever will be. No being on any planet, no being of any degree of intelligence could possibly be simultaneously angry and happy. But we fool ourselves, either thinking that our anger is justified and necessary, or when we're angry, we're actually living in the future. We're imagining a better future as a result of our anger, and it doesn't work that way. So anger is deceptive. The first step is to actually experience how unpleasant it is to be angry, regardless of whether you express it or not. It is pain. Anger is not only a cause of suffering, it is also a state of suffering, always. Now, people will argue with me about this, and they're very welcome to do so. But this is something I know from my own experience. And so one thing to keep in mind about anger is it's not pleasant. So that's one reason not to want to get angry. The second reason is that, as in the analogy of drunk dialing, it's not productive. It's not helpful. When I'm angry, I think that I'm expressing my views with appropriate vigor. I'm not. I sound like a complete blathering idiot. Everybody does when they're angry. Angry people sound stupid. In fact, in a moment of anger, we are stupid. If you're a really smart person, you're just a little dumb. when you're angry. If you're a normal person, you're really dumb when you're angry. It doesn't matter. You're operating in a diminished state, diminished capacity. So not only does anger not pleasant at the time, but it creates future problems. And I'm not even talking about the whole Buddhist eschatological, future life stuff about what the negative karma you accumulate and so on. Although ultimately it starts with the same thing. So anger is no fun and leads to no good. Once you experience that, and you really have to butt your head against the brick wall of anger's consequences several times before you'll make this decision, you won't want to be angry. And not wanting to be angry will become a concern. That concern, I don't want to be angry, will eventually become a habit. And that habit will become a mindful reminder, like what Sally was describing, Because, it's funny, when I was a small child, I could watch this happen. I don't know why, something about early childhood development that I don't know, because I've never studied early childhood development. But when I was a child, I could watch myself becoming angry, and I could actually see the point of choice. There was a point where I could choose. Now, it was not what we would call a free or impartial choice, because there was a part of me that wanted to be angry because I thought it would make me feel better and have good consequences. So I did often still choose anger, but I was aware, consciously aware, I'm not talking about infancy, I'm really talking about 3, 4, 5 years of age. I could choose whether to get angry or not, usually at my mother. I was always getting angry at my mother. And as of today, I believe it was because of me, not because of her. Of course, I was heavily influenced by popularized wellness disciplines, not actual ones, but popularized to blame everything on my parents. But I'm starting to remember more, and I think it was me. I think I really was just an angry. I think it was physical. I think it was, And then at a certain age, by about 6 or 7, it was faster. I guess my brain had developed to the point where, places and everything were on the front track or faster or something. And so I couldn't choose. I didn't have that conscious thing. So I'm trying to get back to that slowness. Maybe as I lose my cognitive capacity, as I get older, I'll actually slow down the anger thing. So, well, let's see. Do I want to get angry at Davis or not? It might be fun to get angry at Davis. He makes funny faces when you yell at him. On the other hand, it gives me a bad stomach. So, there's that kind of... That's Davis, for those who don't know. Usually we always use, how in logic class in school, it's always Socrates. Socrates is human, all humans are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. And then in classic Buddhism logic, it's always the Buddha's naughty cousin Devadatta. Devadatta is this, Devadatta is that, is the example. Here we use Davis. He's not Socrates, but he's not Devadatta. He's sort of somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Anyone else? Can you please, whoops, sorry, again, I've done that. I don't remember.
It's hard to remember.
Yeah. Can you please address the missing gap in our study of the Dharmic basics and make some suggestions as how they may be addressed?
Okay. I think that it would be helpful, and I'm not really saying this entirely under my own steam, but I've heard Kondro Rinpoche talk about the need for this, not referring to this particular community, just in general. And especially I've seen her Her Eminence's enthusiasm for the publication of texts that could fill this gap in. I think there needs to be more study of basic Buddhist topics. And the reason I say that is because when you practice Vajrayana, you're constantly being given the symbolic equivalence or the symbolic meaning, or sometimes it's more than symbolic, it's literal, but the meaning of these different deities. Such and such deities are the pure five aggregates. Such and such deities are the pure five elements. Such and such deities are the sense factors. Such and such deities are the 18 dhatus, and so on. If you've never studied the aggregates, if you don't understand the Buddhist understanding of the senses or of the 18 elements or dhatus of sense and conscious experience, you're not getting the whole richness of it. And so I think that ideally, some study of the Abhidharma, such as one book that I can recommend is is it the seventh Karmapas, sixth Karmapas? I forget which Karmapas, but one of the Jawan Karmapa wrote a book that has been published in English by KDD Publications, translated by Kempo David Karma Chupel, called Jewels from the Treasury. And it essentially is I guess you could call it a survey. No, it's more than a survey. It's a treatment of the Abhidharma Kosha, which is to say that the treasury of Abhidharma, the Abhidharma common to all vehicles. And I think that would be one good place to start. Alternatively, and perhaps a little, I can't really compare them for ease of reading in English, but normally what would precede that in any monastic setting would be Khinchen Mipam's The Gateway to Knowledge. Is that what it's called, Gateway to Knowledge? And that whole thing has been translated, right? All 10, yeah. So that would be a very good place for people to read. The only chapters, I'm not saying I have knowledge of all of this by any means. The only chapters of Gateway to Knowledge that I ever received formally were the chapter on the skandhas or aggregates and the chapter on interdependence. And really, ideally, one should study all 10 topics or 10 chapters with someone who has been trained either in a shedra or a less formal environment to understand them. Failing that, one can just read the English. It's about sutra, not tantra, so it's acceptable to read it even without the reading transmission. That's the dividing line. It's better to have a reading transmission for everything, but given the difficulty of getting reading transmissions in the West, you can read basically anything about the sutras, common vehicle or the Mahayana, without the reading transmission, and do not read anything about Vajrayana without the reading transmission. So, for example, if you want to read the third Karmapa's profound inner principles and its commentary, it would be better to receive the reading transmission, at least, preferably a detailed instruction. And so that's why, But with sutra stuff, there's no great danger. So that's what I meant.
Okay, next. Question. If a Dharma center is akin to a spiritual hospital, and the Dharma seekers are akin to patients, then who are akin to the doctors?
In this center, I can only speak about this center. I would say that Bardor Rinpoche is the founding physician, and Lama Chotop is the practicing on-call physician. Lama Nyima assists him, and I'm just a translator.
I have a question, I think, too, actually. Okay, but I'm not quite sure how to word it.
Okay.
Definitely, I noticed that or I have noticed for the past like maybe 7 years, that my strongest klesha or just like area of suffering is feeling like unworthy, like shame, feeling wrong. You know, that like mental, that thought pattern that just is like
Shame or
shame, yeah.
guilt? Shame?
Shame. I think shame and guilt are definitely connected, but
Okay.
it's more of like a feeling of unworthiness, you know, that colors all the aspects of life. And I know that that's an issue for a lot of people, and like I know a lot. Yeah. So I'm definitely curious. I brought it up to you earlier about, you know, self-love and like how like in Lojong, it doesn't mention self-love at all, you know, or maybe it does.
Actually, when His Holiness was teaching Lojong one time, he said, His Holiness the Karmapa, he said that even though it doesn't expressly mention it, you can infer, if you read between the lines, that it's a prerequisite or a preliminary step. And I'll go back to that if I remember and explain which section of it he was referring to if we're talking about the Jangpa Lodrutai Lojong text. First of all, I can't, as I've mentioned several times, I can't see your mind. So I don't exactly know, and words can be words have very broad meanings. So I'm going to talk about my sense of shame and my sense of unworthiness, and you tell me if this rings a bell. All my life, and to a lesser extent now, thanks to really this, but still a little bit, I have felt that I did not have the right to exist. That I was, forget about being a mistake, I was definitely, an accident, but that's very common. I mean, most of us really are accidents. I felt that I was a monster, a monstrosity, that I was an aberration, that I was something that should not have been born. And I have to say that I'm not 100% sure where this really comes from. My parents had a child. I had an older full brother who passed away later. It's a whole different story. But I had in between, my older brother was born in 1953, and me, I was born in 1959. Around, I think, either soon after, maybe a year after my older brother was born, I forget the dates, but they had another baby who was given the set of 4 names that I now was given. And the baby died in his first year of sudden infant death syndrome, crib death. And all the pictures of him were destroyed or hidden away. And I was told about him. I saw his gravestone, which had my full long name on it, middle name, saint's name, the whole thing, the whole shebang was me. But as a result, I felt that my parents were very hesitant to bond with me. My father wouldn't hold me, for one thing, because the baby had died while under his care or supervision. And, it was very, very hard for my mother. And so there were no pictures taken. I mean, we had albums full of pictures of my brother and so on and so on. So whether it was because of that family history, and that happens a lot, it used to happen a lot, it still does happen a lot, or whether, as I say, and I now start to think, I was actually born with a chip on my shoulder, which is what I was told, and I think it may actually be true. I think that for we could say karmic reasons, habitual reasons, I was born pissed off. Now, it could be I nearly died of bacterial meningitis in my first few months. And back in 1959, that was no picnic. I mean, there were not that many antibiotics, especially for newborn babies. But anyway, so I didn't die, apparently. And so for whatever reason, I always felt that I was a monstrosity, that I did not fit in, that I had no right to be alive, no right to be here. And that has influenced everything I've done since. I felt it in kindergarten. I remember feeling it throughout every year of my primary and secondary education. I felt it in college. I felt it in retreat. I feel it now to some extent. It's diminished through the practice of Dharma, but it's not gone. So for me, when you talk about unworthiness, it's that what I project onto that, my own sense of unworthiness is, I have no right to be here. I have no right to be alive. I have no right to be taking up oxygen that other people could be breathing. Is that what you're talking about?
It might be definitely connected to that, but definitely it's come up a lot with like body image has been a really big one, but that shifted into just maybe what was more underneath that, just feeling maybe not smart enough or not like capable because I'm not smart enough or just something, and I don't necessarily know where it comes from, but like a basic insecurity or a basic just like not trusting that, I don't know.
So you're talking about a fairly generic low self-esteem?
I guess so. Like the just that voice that's like, you're wrong. There's that kind of like,
Whose voice is it?
Yeah.
I think it's also a female.
It might be a
Well, yeah,
Is
although
that
I
what
have
did
to.
she say?
Yeah.
I really relate to. So.
Yeah. I think that well, I'm not a woman. I don't know. I can't help wondering if some of that may be our culture.
Right.
But I don't know women from other cultures, really other cultures, well enough to ask them if they have that. I don't know. I mean, certainly in terms of body image, the media and the fashion industry have, and you remember when Barbie dolls were actually a shape that would be physically impossible to remain alive.
Yeah.
I mean, even ballet dancers can't be that shape. We've somehow distorted our image of the female body. And this does affect female children very, very early. And I've observed that. I've not lived that. But I think low self-esteem as a basic human problem may transcend gender.
Yes.
I think it can be focused on different things, but I think it transcends gender. And the way you describe it, it moves from one thing to another. It's not always just about the body. It's sometimes about the mind. You judge your own intelligence harshly. The stock answer to that question that I've heard given by eminent teachers has always been study Buddha nature, learn Buddha nature. I don't believe that works for us. I don't think it's because it's acquired information, it's a belief system. And you're talking about something that is somewhat deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
Both what you both describe and what I've experienced are different forms of the same fundamental malaise. Now, before going further with that, I want to remember to tell you what His Holiness said about this and about the role of self-love in mind training.
Yes.
He said that, first of all, that, while we think of compassion as other-oriented, compassion is the desire that one or more other beings be free from suffering and its causes. But he said implicit in that is that we have compassion for ourselves, because it's not one or more other beings, it's one or more beings. Beings include, the category beings includes us as individuals. So the problem is not, the solution is not to exclude ourselves from compassion. We should just not focus our compassion only on ourselves. And he said, in fact, compassion is taught initially in Buddhism as directed at oneself. He said that usually in Buddhist terms, when we talk about compassion for oneself, we call it nijong, the determination to be free. And when we talk about compassion for others, we call it nyingje, or compassion. But he said the actual emotional affect of these is the same. The determination to be free is born from caring about what happens to you. The compassion for others is born from caring about what happens to others. So the antithesis of these is, we normally think that the antithesis of these is anger and self-hatred. So it's actually apathy, not caring. In the specific context of the Mahayana mind training discipline, he said that the slogan, the sequence of exchange begins with oneself. And the technique that you imagine your future self in front of you, instead of thinking of another person. And this is taught in the book. And you take on their suffering into your present self, which is the opposite of what we normally do. And you give your present pleasure and happiness to your future self. He says that should be done first before you even work on your mother or any other being. And so he says the fact that that instruction is provided both in the root text by Lama Yeshe Dorje and in the commentary by Janglo Tai is proof that there is an understanding in that tradition that we need to have compassion for ourselves, or self-love, because love and compassion are two sides of the same coin. Love is the desire that a being be happy and have causes of happiness. Compassion is the desire that a being be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. If that being is yourself, that's self-love and self-compassion. If that being is another, then it's other-directed love and compassion. But the affect is the same. And there was something else that occurred to me, and then I forgot about it. What was it? Your future self and the present self. I lost it. There's something else I was remembering, but I lost it. So, yes, it's necessary. But in this connection, we have to be careful, again, to bring up spiritual bypass. We have to be careful not to make generalities out of Tonglen or really any other meditation technique. For example, when we have to tackle the biggest problem first. When we look at our future self and we think, I'm willing to take on the suffering that I will otherwise experience in the future, give the happiness that I'm experiencing now to that future self. It's good to be very specific. So let's say you want to focus on your feeling of unworthiness, low self-esteem, shame, whatever you call it. It doesn't matter what word you give to it, but that thing. Focus on that specifically. In a different context, Kenshin Trungpa Rinpoche once said that one of the problems we face in our practice is we don't focus enough, by which he meant not so much that we don't work hard enough. He meant that, for example, when people do Vajrasattva practice, they create a general concept of all wrongdoings, obscuration, sickness, and demons. And all that. And just those ideas, those words, and may all of that be washed out of me by the nectar that comes from Vajrasattva's body. And he says that's too general. you really need to focus on your biggest problem first. What is your worst klesha? What is your most dangerous habitual behavior? Focus on that. Focus on those first, and it'll be much more effective. So in your case, you could use the practice of taking and sending directed at your future self, focused on this sense of shame. And there was something else, but I forgot it. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time to talk Turkey to us. I find it very helpful to hear about specific personal experiences. Share as many more of those as you're able to, comfortable with.
Well, I'm 62 years old, so there's a lot of, I've had a lot of personal experiences. I don't know how many of them are of value to hear about. So, it kind of something has to occur to me. I can't really just sort of, I'm not,
Should I go to the next one?
Sure.
You probably don't want to there, but a lot of lamas and monks died in 1959, the year were born. You talked about being born with a chip on your shoulder. Might it be connected with the manner of your death in your previous life?
Well, I won't lie. I mean, I've lied a lot in my life. So when I say I won't lie, I'm being right now. I'm not going to lie. It's occurred to me that maybe I was born pissed off because I died really badly, but I have no idea. I have no memory of previous lives. I have definite, strong tendencies to be interested in certain things within Buddhism, which may be indications of past familiarity, but could also be just that I'm, whatever. And I think I discourage myself from speculating about previous lives because previous lives are not going to be a problem. I'm more worried about my next life and future lives. So I don't know. For whatever the reason, I don't think that I have memories of my mother. Recently, last week, I had this come up for me for some reason. My mother trying to soothe me when I was, I had a kind of unquenchable anger, and I was barely verbal. So it would have been early in my second year. So, I think I don't think this was anything that my parents did or didn't do, all family history aside. I think I was, for whatever reason, it can be physical, it's like you're born with a certain, disposition. And it's just, it just goes with the genetic inheritance.
I think that's it.
Yes.
This morning you spoke about feeling frustrated about the way people behave or certain people, someone you may run into that's difficult or
Mhm.
you already know you don't like the person
Mhm.
in particular. So when that happens and it's someone that, for example, I know I have to deal with for a few months in my work life,
Mhm.
I try to approach it knowing that in advance and understanding that I don't want my tone of voice
Mhm.
to reflect anything like anger or impatience or frustration. So what do you suggest is a way to prepare myself mentally when I know I have to interact with someone like that?
Well, it sounds like you're already doing it. Basically, it's to accept responsibility for how you present with or to that person. And what's recommended traditionally is if it's a 5 days a week ongoing situation, then each day that you're going to be working with that person, you simply have to remind yourself, you have to create the momentum of the impetus or momentum of intention, which is very powerful. And simply say to yourself, today, no matter what they say or do, I am not going to get angry, or I am not going to show my disdain, or I am not going to, shoot them, or whatever it is. And you just don't do it. And as I said, initially, if it's a very difficult situation, it'll probably just take more to get you to do what you vowed to yourself or what you've promised yourself to do. Don't berate yourself for that. Instead, be happy with the fact that it took longer. And the next day, regenerate the same intention today. And no matter what they do, I am not going to get angry, or I'm not going to be disrespectful, or I'm not going to make nasty faces, whatever it is. And each day that you generate that intention, the intention will become stronger. Because we react to people in part because they have attributes, or we perceive them having attributes that we don't like in ourselves. But also in part because we have a habit of a certain kind of reaction. I have a habit of judging people who share certain of my predominant kleshas. There's two parts to that. There's the fact that those kleshas set me off because I don't like them in myself. And therefore, the other person serves as a mirror that shows me my own dirty face. But the second part is the habit of judgment. That's a separate issue. The fact that someone has the same kleshas you have, and that may therefore be an irritant, does not in itself require you to be judgmental, does not in itself require you to speak, act in a certain way, or make certain faces. We tend to do that out of habit. Did that help?
Yeah, no, it helps, but it's also a very, it's like a reality check here, because if I think this person, if I don't like their behavior because I think they're greedy, you're saying, well, they're not probably could be greedy, or if I don't like their behavior because they're controlling every situation, then I have to think maybe I also act that way.
I'm not comfortable with saying that that is necessarily true of you or any other person, because I don't know you well enough to know if you're either greedy or controlling. But I've learned through my own experience that in most cases, when someone bothers me, if someone's behavior is egregious, even if their behavior is something utterly foreign to your own makeup, it'll still bother you. But if someone who behaves only about as bad as everybody else bothers you more, that's a sign that it could be something you share. I think it's possible that someone could be so greedy or so controlling that even people who are not greedy and controlling could be bothered by it, especially if it affects third parties. That's a whole different thing. That's where we get into then it's much more complicated, because then we have our projections on the third person as well, our hopes for their well-being and so on, and then we can rationalize our anger by saying, but I have to protect so-and-so. That gets very, very complicated. But if you have a group of 5 co-workers, and one of them, and they're all pretty much the same, I mean, different people, but none of them really sticks out like a sore thumb, and one of them bothers you, that might be the case. But if someone's behavior is egregious, even if you don't share it, of course, it can be a trial.
All right, not a lot of questions have come in. I'll start here and then I'll go to my emails. Anyone else here? Okay, so just to say, before we're saying thank you so much for your honesty and integrity and sharing with us how you authentically and diligently you work with your own mind. It's very helpful and meaningful for me personally, and I would venture the majority of us.
Well, that's kind.
Now the next question before you get.
Before I get all choked up by my authenticity and diligence. I wrote a friend last week, I said, I can pretend around Buddhists because I keep them at such a distance. They don't get close enough to me to know what a piece of, well, I use the word excrement, but I am. And anyway.
So the next, could you please say a little more about being judgmental? Are there Buddhist teachers that can act as antidote? Are there Buddhist teachings that can act as antidotes to being judgmental? And are there times when that's okay?
This is going to come up tomorrow morning when we start to talk about pure outlook or sacred outlook, which I kind of dissed this morning because I was talking about spiritual bypass. But tomorrow we'll be talking about when it's why we need it. So with all things Buddhist, you have to practice or emphasize at a given time what is of the foremost importance in that specific situation. And this is, I think I've seen that statement attributed to Lord Gampopa, but I don't know if it's unique to him, and I'm sure it's a sentiment that has been voiced in other words by countless Buddhist teachers. Earlier I said we have to have 2 things going on at the same time. We have to have a view as high as the sky and an attention to the details of our behavior as fine as finely ground powder. It's actually more complicated than that. We have to actually be doing 3 things at the same time. A common vehicle, basic Buddhist common sense thing, a Mahayana thing, a Vajrayana thing. That's why we have to begin with the common sense of the common vehicle, because you have to learn to juggle 1 ball before you can juggle 2, and you have to be good at juggling 2 before you can juggle 3. Not that they contradict one another, they never contradict one another, but the answer to questions is what is of the foremost importance. I'll give you a concrete example of this. The Vajrayana rule book says that at any tsok, there should be alcohol and meat. And many great teachers, Koma Chame Rinpoche, Paul Tsula Trengwa, many others have written about this, the reasons for, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and lots of things like that. But you also have to look at the context. For example, in this community, we practice that. There is a small amount of wine distributed in small spoonfuls during the tsok, and some piece of, usually we use beef jerky because it's easiest, distributed as well. The reasons why this is important are not particularly germane to our topic. That's more of a specifically Vajrayana topic, and I'm not 100% comfortable with going all the way with Vajrayana topics in a public setting. Nevertheless, that is what the Vajrayana rulebooks say. The question is, when is it of greater importance to use these substances as sacraments, for lack of another word, or not to? Some Buddhist communities that practice Vajrayana don't use them nowadays. They don't have meat at their tzum, and they don't use liquor. And you have to think about two things. What is the real effect on the participants? What is the real effect on witnesses? In India, Vajrayana, the existence of it, all of its iconography, with the exception of a little bit of Tara, a little bit of Chandrasekhar, but very, very borderline sutra at least, was completely secret. Tsoks were secret. Tsoks were practiced, were taught, Junglo Dutai writes about this in the Treasure of Knowledge, in secret buildings that were 2/3 underground, or in places like charnel grounds where no sane person other than us, if we qualify, would set foot. In Tibet, it became the state religion to one degree or another, and so it was less secret. And in the modern world, with the state of media, you can't hide anything. Basically, if you translate it, it will be on the internet somehow, somewhere. I hope not what I'm working on, but you never know. And if you do something, somebody's going to take a picture of it with their cell phone. And the cell phone taking pictures, of course, is I think it's far worth it, because I'd rather have pictures taken of things that we can therefore prove happened, the sort of thing I'm talking about, and therefore deal with it realistically. But it means that we also have to understand that there are other people who are going to be affected. So there are some times, and I'm not saying we should change what we're doing. I really don't think we should. Neither does Lama Yeshe, nor did Bardor Rinpoche. But there is a good reason for those communities that have chosen not to have even trace amounts of alcohol or trace amounts of meat in their tzums, because they're aware that their greater public, the ones who will in some cases be present and in other cases will bear witness to the events, would flip out. They would develop antipathy toward the Vajrayana teachings. Similarly, you have to really consider what need is foremost in all things with Buddhism, especially when you're trying to decide on whether to emphasize the Patimoksha, emphasize the Bodhisattva, or emphasize the Vajrayana. Where did this come from? What was the question? I've totally lost my track of thought.
All right, let me go back to the question. Could you please?
Oh, about judgment, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess the textbook answer would be that the practices of the higher Vajrayana are, in part, this is by no means their whole purpose, because they're incredibly profound. So to say they are for this or for this is really selling them short. They're for everything. But one of the things that they deal with is teaching us not to judge. and helping us not judge. And because we tend to mistake moral choices, which are valid and necessary, we tend to mix those up with being finicky about icky things. So from a society, from the point of view of a society in which Vajrayana originated, alcohol and meat in any form are icky things. Originally, they're icky things because when people get drunk, they do bad things. And when people eat meat, either somebody died, unless it's roadkill, or it's at least encouraging others to kill. But we mix up moral reasons for our sense of ickiness. Because meat is the product of murder. Let's be honest here. Meat is the product of murder unless the animal died naturally. The fact that I didn't kill it is not an excuse. It's that somebody got murdered. Definitely. Now I eat meat. So yes, I'm a hypocrite. You know, alcohol is bad. It's not inherently bad, it's just a chemical, but it makes us do stupid things. It makes me do really stupid things. You know, it's not good. That's why we have them, so that we do not confuse the legitimate moral reasons for our choices with our sense of ickiness. So, that's an example of the way that we try to transcend judgment of others. And then but those are just minor aspects. I mean, our practice does not consist of drinking spoonfuls of wine and eating scraps of beef jerky. Or it shouldn't. Our practice consists of altering our perception of ourselves and everything else. But we'll talk about that tomorrow morning.
I think we're there. Oh, what is this Vajrayana rule book?
It comes from various tantras of the various levels of tantra that give what are called the samaya. A samaya as a singular indicates a contract or agreement, and when used as a plural indicates the rules of that contract or agreement. And there are many, many, many of them. Some are particular to particular empowerments, and some are fairly common or generic. Any other questions? Going once?
One that came up for me, I think it's common, but I just be interested to hear your answer today. You talked about living based on the past a little bit, and especially memory and thoughts and habits, and where are those on a physical level?
I don't know, you'd have to talk to a brain scientist.
Really?
I mean, I think they can actually track them. I know that they can track where happiness is in the brain, because they hooked Mingyur Rinpoche up to all of that, and in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and they were able to detect how happy he was. They did it with Matthew Ricard also. Sorry, Mathieu Ricard. And several others. So I think they can track a state of non-duality where the border between self and other has diminished. There's a part of the brain which lights up when that happens. Other parts that become less active. So I don't know where, but I guess they know where. I mean, like way back in the 60s, I think Dr. Wilder Penfield in Montreal was able to, if he was in Montreal, I think he was at McGill, was able to find, that you could stimulate certain parts of the brain with electricity or a prod, and people would see trees, or they'd see gardens, or they'd see this, and they'd see that. So I mean, as for exactly where, I can't remember the names of brain bits, and even so, it's it's very, very tricky when we talk about the relationship between mind and body, because of course they're neither the same nor different, and but certainly our minds are very affected by our bodies. That's why coffee does one thing, alcohol does another, and so I don't know the answer. I bet if you read cognitive biology, going back to Francisco Varela and other people from like the 80s and 90s, and up to the present day, the stuff that's coming out of the University of Wisconsin, I bet you could find loads and loads of stuff about this.
So, do you think there's a physical location for memories, that they exist?
I don't know. I don't know whether memories are stored in specific places or whether they move around, through the New York subway system, except it's our brain. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure cognitive scientists know. You can probably look that up. But I suspect that there is. I mean, I think that some of our psychiatric treatments, including, the electroshock and things like that, are based upon that. But I don't know. I think our understanding of these things gets finer and finer as time goes on. But I do not share that understanding. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know.
Do you think it's all in the brain? Because I know they find the gray matter in the heart sometimes.
Well, that's the thing. I think that it's very interesting. We talk about neurotransmitters. I think about them all the time because I've for many, many years, have been taking SSRI. And it's very interesting that I can't remember if it was his last teaching here or sometime recently, Lama Yeshe was teaching the songs of Terchen Barway Dorje, and I was very, very sick because I had taken supplements along with my medication, and they blocked the medication. I stopped taking the supplements, and the medication became unblocked, and I developed what's called a serotonin surge. And it sounds great. If you think about it, it sounds like somebody taking ecstasy, but it wasn't great at all. It wasn't that I felt, happy. I didn't feel particularly good. What I felt was very, very nauseating. And the reason is because there are serotonin receptors in your stomach and your intestines, not just in your head. And the medication that helped me was actually the anti-nausea medication that helped me was actually a serotonin antagonist, blocked the serotonin or the 5-H, the things that serotonin either become or that becomes. Anyway, I'm no good at that stuff. But anyway, it helped. And so there are a lot of stuff that we associate with brain function that are actually maybe happening. Now, the fact that you have serotonin receptors in your stomach does not mean that your stomach thinks. But it also doesn't prove that it doesn't. I mean, I don't know, and I've heard about gray matter in the brain. I've heard about gray matter at other points, in the heart. I've heard about gray matter at other points on the spinal cord. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I'm unable, as a lay person, scientifically, to distinguish between authentic science and junk science. And especially when you get into the relationship between mind and body, there are a lot of spiritual people who don't understand science and think they do, and will write hogwash. It gets all over the internet. That's not really science, or not good science. And then you've got scientists who think they understand things like Buddhism and don't, and their science is good, but then they write hogwash about Buddhism. So I'm cautious, in believing anything. And this offends everybody. I offend my scientific friends because I distrust their take on Buddhism, and I offend all my so-called spiritual friends because I thoroughly distrust their take on anything scientific.
All right, so here's another question. I've seen a fair amount of joy shared and some expressions of honesty. That is to say, I've seen a fair amount of joy shared and some expressions of honesty and authenticity while a person has been somewhat inebriated. Although not to a great degree, admittedly, drunkenness is often counterproductive, certainly, but perhaps there's such a thing as responsible alcohol consumption?
There are different opinions about that. And there are even different opinions about what irresponsible alcoholic consumption consists of, whether it is the case that some people become irresponsible whenever they have alcohol and therefore can't stop drinking, or that and there's some, and that there are different people. There are in some organizations they call it alcoholics versus normies. They call people who are not alcoholics normies. And then there is the contemporary belief that irresponsibility consists of a disorder that anyone can develop through excessive consumption of alcohol, called alcohol use disorder, where the person develops AUD, and anyone can develop it. Through drinking too much, they become habituated to it, and it becomes an addiction. Whichever model you subscribe to as an individual, and I guess we each have to make up our minds. I change my mind about this issue, which is dear to my heart, about 3 times every day. A lot of folks abuse alcohol. There are people who can have small amounts of alcohol. I think that the National Institutes of Health have made it very clear what constitutes a safe amount and a dangerous amount. But nowadays, they're tending to say that even the supposed health benefits of moderate consumption, which is 1 standard drink a day, no more than 1 standard drink a day for women. This is based on weight, and no more than 2 for men. They're starting to say that even that is dangerous. Some scientists are. I can only talk about myself. I have experienced states of mild inebriation where I thought at the time that I had better ideas for my work. Certainly, if I become mildly inebriated, I do experience sometimes heightened states of devotion, but I can experience those without the alcohol, sometimes. And in neither case are they guaranteed. I can be cranky with or without it. The problem, well, I've had several problems with it, not just problems in my life, but also problems that I've considered, problems to be solved in terms of what I think about it. Problems that I keep on coming to is that in my experience, most of the states of inspiration and authenticity that I think I am experiencing in a state of mild alcoholic inebriation, it implies something more. Let's say a mild buzz. Later turn out to be suspect. Those ideas that sound so creative, those poems that seem so meaningful, the next day have lost their luster. So, speaking only about myself, I can't speak about anybody else. I cannot say, speaking truthfully, that I have ever had an experience of authentic spirituality as I understand it that was caused by any amount, whether even trace or otherwise, consumption of alcohol. Now, I drink the alcohol that is put in my palm and typically spills over. What I've started doing since we started wearing the pretty Zens, because I don't want to get, with the other one I was okay with wine stains on wine colored, it's not so bad. But with this, I am not spilling anything on this. So I grab that red napkin that they give me beforehand, and when the lad comes around with the spoon, I hold that napkin under my hand so it can, because it's always a little bit more. Maybe my hands are weird shaped or I don't, and then, and I get it to my mouth really slowly because I don't want to spill on this. I like this. I wear this not with pride, because I got nothing to be proud of, but with honor. I feel honored by wearing this. This robe means something to me. And so I don't want to get wine stains on it. So I'm real careful when I do that, which means that if it's just us, Lama Yeshe has to sustain the long life prayers for longer than he might otherwise, because I'm just doing it at a snail's pace. But I drink that. But I do not drink it because I expect a spiritual experience to ensue from that. Now, empowerments, that's a whole different thing, but I'm not going to talk about empowerment or empowerment experiences because that's the most private thing we have in our lives. But so I am skeptical based on my experience of myself. I am skeptical about the proposition that I will ever have an authentic spiritual experience under the sway of alcohol. If I do, I think it would be in spite of the alcohol and not because of it. Because if I sum up my lifetime's experience of alcohol, it makes me stupid. It makes me stupid. A little bit makes me a little bit stupid. A lot makes me really stupid. It makes me stupid. That's all I gotta say.
Well, his follow-up was, I was referring more to interactions within a shared gathering, whether practitioners or not alcoholic potential for creative output, more as a bonding libation.
Well, alcohol lowers inhibitions. That's what, I mean, among other things, that's what makes it fun in a group. You know, people laugh more at your old jokes when they've been drinking, especially if you're like me and you tell the same jokes repeatedly for 30 or 40 years. You know, people are more likely to laugh at those old chestnuts when they've had a drink. At the same time, so it can be, yeah, I won't deny that that can be pleasant. And certainly when I am sober in company where I used to be habitually less than sober, I feel uncomfortable. But that's also because of what is called state-specific learning. State-specific learning is where, let's say, you go clubbing, and when you go clubbing, you have a drink or two. So therefore you get to where you're comfortable going clubbing and dancing in clubs. I've never been clubbing, but I know that it's a thing. When you drink a bit. And then you stop drinking and you go clubbing and you feel uncomfortable, you feel self-conscious. Well, part of that is the habit and state-specific learning. And you may not dance as well as you did when you had a drink. I doubt that anybody dances better after 2 or 3 drinks than they do sober, but I suppose it's possible. But that can be transcended, like any other habit. You know, that can be transcended. Now, I'm not on a bandwagon here for you know, I'm not a teetotal polemicist. I'm not trying to mess with anybody's whatever, you know. You all do whatever you want, but I'm in no position to tell anybody else to do or not do anything, especially when it comes to the creature, as we call it. But my experience of myself makes me, you know, skeptical. I've been in social situations where I definitely would have been less interested in being with that particular group had I been sober because nobody else was. But I have to ask the question, do I really want to be in that group? I can be around the people in this room, individually or all together, with perfect comfort, stone cold sober, which is what I am. And so my question is, to bond with people, if I need to bond with them over drinks, what does that say about the quality of the bond? I don't have an answer. I just posed the question, rhetorical. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, we just about out of time.
We've got 8 minutes.
I find myself talking about dharma.
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely more than I should, or maybe it just feels like a habit, like it's something I'm very excited about. And when I see that people, the masters like you and Lama Trata, in public settings,
Mm-hmm.
it seems very direct, few words, and reserved. But I'm just wondering what is appropriate to share with people, and you know, the most inspiring things for me are things about the view of Krishna, either Mahayana or even borderline primordial purity.
I think it has to be case by case.
Right.
I have been, for much of my life, very guilty of oversharing in every way. I tell people things about myself that they'd be better off not knowing. And I'm not talking about the things I say during my seminars. That's actually By my standards, that's like the height of discretion. You know, I suppose in my filter, I have a filter, but it's not, doesn't fit the window right, so sometimes stuff gets through. And that includes not just indiscreet statements about myself, but also talking way too much about Buddhism. It's an interesting but apparently true thing that it's not just talking too much about Buddhism to non-Buddhists. You have to be careful what you say to other Buddhists. You really have to gauge the other person's interest. There's a story about Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Lake poet, the Lake District poet, and what was his buddy? Was it Wordsworth? Somebody. Longfellow, I think. Wordsworth was American. I don't know. Anyway, one of them. And Coleridge would just like go on and on and on. He would grab somebody's, in this one instance, if the story is true, not apocryphal, I learned it in college. And he knew that he was detaining his audience, that he would go on and on and on about whatever he was thinking of. And he'd hold the button of the other gentleman's, not his waistcoat, that's really his vest, but his greatcoat. And then he closes his eyes. So at one point, his closest friend, I can't remember if it was Longfellow or whoever, it was whichever one of those really, really common names that we know whose poems we never ever read. That guy, Coleridge's buddy. It wasn't Shelley or anything like that. It was, anyway, really had an appointment that he was going to miss if he didn't, leave. And so he took out a pair of nail scissors and carefully, so that Coleridge wouldn't notice, cut the button off his coat and walked away, and Coleridge was still holding the button. So you don't want to be like that. It's very easy to become like that when you're excited about something. Like I get really excited about certain arcane aspects of Buddhism. Let's say I'll be translating something and I just get so excited by what I worked on that day that I really want to talk to somebody about it. I really want to share it with somebody. And the only person that I can talk to about the kind of stuff that I'm working on these days is Lama Yeshe. And he already knows that stuff, and I send it to him. But like the kind of stuff that I find really exciting, if you explained it to most people, they go, ah! So you really gotta know your audience. When it comes to answering questions, and this is where I get into trouble, obviously, is in this one. Try to understand what the person wants to know and tell them that if you know. Like if it's a technical question, answer that. Don't go off on a riff. I mean, I let myself go off on riffs because this is kind of a small group and there are people listening, and this is the last question anyway. But that's the thing. So don't overshare. When it comes to non-Buddhists, don't tell them anything they have not specifically asked, because otherwise you're preaching, you're proselytizing, which we are forbidden to do from the word go. You're allowed to speak of Buddhism to non-Buddhists if and when they ask you to. Like I've heard you people have this thing called Four Noble Truths. What's that about? Explain it with as little jargon as possible. And I think that's the way to go. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes your enthusiasm can be legitimately infectious. I mean, sometimes somebody is actually interested in something that you're interested in, and then, but you'll get a sense of that. And let's conclude with the dedication of Sonam de ye dam je zeng ba ni dom ne nye me rana dam je ne chenga na je ma la tro pa ye simben zo le ro wa de ye je wo gan Sanam Yeshe Gyamtso Sanam Yeshe Gyamtso Damba Gwanye Damba Jo Janjo Zemne Ramboje Manje Vanam Jejo Yama Nyama Me Padam Gonde Gondo Malwajo Semjen Damje De Dam Joje Ngenro Damje Dando Dambajo Jangjo Zamba Ganda Zajoma Denda Gwanjema Ramba Ro Sanje Rinje Zuzin Dambe Jangwan Deja Do Mengpai Zamje me jongje be sangha si je jongda jambe darje. Thank you, Lama. Thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow morning.